morning, everyone. Welcome back after a long hiatus to our Sunday morning class. This class will, from next week, will begin to learn the Tanya of the Alter Rebbe, which we haven't done in a long time on the Sunday morning, and there's a lot of students that want it. But today, we will, in fact, do as a preparation for Rosh Hashanah, we'll teach about the upcoming Yom Tov that everyone is preparing for and thinking about, and therefore we'll teach about Rosh Hashanah today instead. Rosh Hashanah is very different from all the other Yom Tovim. All the other holidays are associated in one way or other with an event, a historical event that happened to the Jewish people. Either it was a miraculous delivery from an enemy, whether it's Chanukah or Purim, or Pesach with the Exodus from Egypt, even Shavuos, which is also commemorates the giving of the Torah, and Sukkot, which is the celebration where we thank God for protecting us in the desert for 40 years when they traveled through the desert with Moshe Rabbeinu, with Moses. Rosh Hashanah is very different in that way. Or is it? Is this day an event, a day that we celebrate or commemorate an event in our history? The answer is no. Nothing happened to the Jewish people in the past history for which we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. What did happen today is a universal event. It's the day that God created Adam and Chava, the first man and the first woman. And nevertheless, when you look into the prayers and in the liturgy and in the writings of our sages, we talk about Rosh Hashanah as Zeh Hayom Tchilas Ma'asecha. This is the day of the beginning of your works, of your actions, of your creation, I guess. And the rabbis immediately, ask, what does it mean? This is the day of the beginning of your creation. The beginning of the creation actually happened 5 days earlier, because Adam and Chava were created on the 6th day of creation, right? Mm-hmm. God created the world in 6 days. On the 7th day he rested. It was on Friday that God created the first man and the first woman. So why are we saying Zayim Tchilas Masecha, today is the beginning of your work? If in fact the beginning of God's work or creation was 5 days earlier, which today would be the 25th of Elul, which is 5 days prior to Rosh Hashanah. That's a good question. The answer is that every work, everything we do has a purpose. There's a purpose to everything. Why did God create the world? He created the world in order to have this physical domain, which is the lowest of all of creation. He wanted that over here, mankind should turn it into a godly place. The words of the Medrash, that he had a desire to create for himself a dira b'tachtenim, a dwelling place here on earth. So when did he do that? It took him 6 days to fulfill this mission. You can ask, why did it have to take 6 days? God could have done it in 1 second. You need 6 days for this. So every day represents another of the divine attributes. There are 6 divine attributes. First is chesed, kindness. Second is gevura, which means strict judgment, severity. The third is tiferes, which is the beauty or compassion. And every day, his creation was the result of another one of these supernal attributes. So on the first day, he created light, correct? Created light. Light makes things, reveals. When it's light, you see things. It's a kindness. It's a manifestation of great kindness. On the second day, he separated the heavens from the earth. So that represents Gevura, separation, which is associated with strict judgment. When you judge someone, you separate from them. When you decide not to give someone something, to hold back, you're separating from them. So separation was the second to Monday's events, Monday's creation, and so on with every day of creation. But God did create the world in 6 days, and he had a purpose. What was the purpose? As I said, to make this world a place for God. Who does that? Mankind does it. So because the world was, so to say, not complete till Friday when man and Adam and Eve were created, so therefore he considers it as if what happened until that Friday was really naught for naught. The real beginning of all creation, and its purpose began on Friday when Adam and Chava were created. And that's why Rosh Hashanah is on the day Adam and Chava was created, not the day that the world was created. And therefore there's no problem saying Za'ayim Tchilas Masecha, today is the beginning of your handiwork. Because it is the beginning. Because it's something you do that ends up purposeless, that doesn't have the ultimate goal, is not counted. When does creation begin? Counting is the day that Adam was created. What happened on that Friday? What do we do today on Rosh Hashanah that reflects what happened on that first Rosh Hashanah? So the Medrash tells us, it's actually based on the Psukim in the Bible, that Adam, when he was created, he knew immediately what his purpose was. You have to remember and understand that Adam was created by God himself. He didn't have a mother. He didn't have a father. He didn't go through the trauma of birth. He didn't have all that. He came into existence pure, and as an adult. He was created he was created as an adult. He didn't have a childhood. He didn't have all that. So he was immediately, on the second he was created, he had a perfect understanding. He was in his full wisdom, and he had a perfect perception of why he was created. So what did he do? Not so much why he was created, but who created him. He knew about God immediately. So what did he do? He looked around. He saw a world with animals, with creations, with everything. The Medrash tells us that he gathered around him all the animals of the world, and he proclaimed to them, "Beyu nishtachave v'nichra l'fnei Hashem Eiseinu." Let us all bow and kneel before the God who made us. And he made all of creation together with him and Chava, accept upon themselves the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of Hashem. He did that. Now, the same Medrash tells us that God created the world out of pure kindness. He created Adam out of pure kindness. He didn't owe Adam anything. Adam didn't do anything to deserve it. He wasn't in existence. By definition, it was all created by God without any kind of preparation from anyone, because they were not there. Simply, they weren't there. So this was called a chesed chinam, in the words of the sages, a free kindness, so to say, an undeserved kindness. Undeserved kindness is really not the ultimate goal. Undeserved kindness is what the rabbis call shameful bread. When you have people giving you things for free, and you didn't earn it from them. It's a shame to receive that, right? To give the example today, when you get welfare. You get a welfare check. You don't work, you don't pay taxes, but you get. So some people need it, but it's not considered an honorable reward. It's considered a shameful reward. Because you're not earning it. You're being given something that you really didn't deserve. the world received its kindness from God and that first Rosh Hashanah for free, undeserved. And it's not their fault, they weren't there yet. But God said that is not my plan. The plan for the future is that this one time I'm giving it to you for free. I'm creating you and sustaining you and giving you everything. But from now on, you will have to earn it and deserve it. And God said, the life force my creative life force, that first 6 days, God invested into creation, a creative life force. You know how God created the world? How did He create the world? He spoke. Let there be light, let there be trees, let there be people, let there be animals. He spoke the world into existence. God said, let there be light, and there was light. So the rabbis tell us, the Baal Shem Tov tells us, that those words, were the creative force that brought the world, the light into creation. In other words, the very words that God said, Yehi Eir, let there be light, served as the creative energy for light, and the same thing with all other creations. But here's what they say that the Kabbalists tell us. Want a little Kabbalah? The Kabbalah tells us that this creative force that God invested and lowered and energized the world with lasts for a 1 year at a time. For 1 year at a time. It starts on Rosh Hashanah, and that life force expires, so to say, on the night or just before the onset of Rosh Hashanah the next year, on the 29th of Elul, this coming Sunday at 7 o'clock or somewhere around there, that godly energy will expire, it will no longer sustain the world anymore. And when does the new life force and the new creative energy descend into the world from Hashem, from God? What causes God to say, yes, I think I'm going to go for this another year. I like the world, I like what the Jewish people are doing for me, I like what the world is producing, and I'm going to go for it one more time for another year. What is that deciding moment? Who knows? The blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah morning. What is the blowing of the shofar? So rabbis tell us the blowing of the shofar is basically the same thing that Adam did on that first Rosh Hashanah, when he gathered all of creation, and he asked them all, let's bow and kneel before God who made us. That is what we are proclaiming with the blowing of the shofar. We're basically saying, God, we want you to be our king. That is the theme of Rosh Hashanah, in a nutshell. The whole thing is to create, because what happens? As I said, the Kabbalah says that the God withdraws his energy from the world every end of the year, and he says, I'm not going on with this project again, unless the world deserves it and earns it and wants it, unless I want it. If they can convince me that this is something that I want, I'll go for it again. Who does the convincing? The Jewish people. How did Adam convince God that the world was a great project? When he kneeled and he created and he asked and he brought the whole world under God's dominion, under God's sovereignty. So that is why in Rosh Hashanah, if you look into this prayer book, the entire theme, or most of it, is about proclaiming God the King of the world. What does that do? You think God doesn't know that he's the King of the universe? He needs you and me to tell him this? Does he? He needs me and you to tell him this? Imagine, he needs me to tell him that he's the king. And if I don't tell him he's not the king, what does this mean? So again, back to the Kabbalah. God is the king of the universe, whether you like it or you don't like it. He's going to be king either way. However, he can sustain the world without pleasure, without interest, or he can sustain the world with pleasure and with interest. You remember the last time you did something that you really had no interest in doing? You just did it because you had no choice? When was the last time you did something like that? You took no pleasure in what you did, but you did it anyway because you just have a responsibility. You have to do it, like waking up in the morning, in the middle of the night to feed your child, right? A long time ago, right?
School, work.
School.
Yeah, I was going to
Sometimes.
Going to work every day. No, some people like their work. Some people like their work. I like my work. See the difference between something you do with pleasure and something you do without pleasure. Something you do without pleasure is what's the part of you that's invested in that, what you're doing, is only the outer experience, the outer shell, or the outer extremities of the person. It lacks the inner dimension of that person. Your tainug, your pleasure, the highest, it says in Kabbalah that tainug and rotzin, pleasure and will, is the highest forces within mankind. And if you don't have the will to do it, because you don't have the pleasure in doing what you're doing, so your hands are involved in what you're doing, but not you, not the person. So you asked me a question, yes? So let's go back to what I was saying before. On the night of Rosh Hashanah, God withdraws His life force that He invested in the world for the year, right? And when does the new life force enter into the world? The next morning, when the Jews blow the shofar. So the Kabbalah asks, the great Kabbalist asks, how is the world in existence from sundown next Sunday night till the morning when the shofar is blown? How is the world in existence? If He withdrew the creative energy and He didn't reinvest it till the next morning, there's 12 hours that the world is in limbo. And it is, you're right, the world is. How is it sustaining itself? So the answer is receiving life force from the external extremities, the outer, the lower levels, the outer projection of Hashem's reality. Just like when you do something which lacks the will, your pleasure, you're just doing it because you have no choice, so you're not in it, it's only your hands, your feet, your mouth, whatever the external part of you is involved in that action, but not your person. The world is in a state of limbo is not the right word, because it is the right word actually, but it says it's in a state of hisalfus, of faint. You know when a person is fainted, so he's alive, but he's alive in a very shaky way. The world is in a state of faint those 12 hours. It's in limbo.
So
Is the world, and by the next morning, if the world does not proclaim God king and decide that they really want Him to, and God does not develop a new pleasure in creation, we revert back to the way we were before the world was created, which is nothingness.
So the Jews have to be here.
The Jews must blow the shofar. It's not only about blowing the shofar. It's much more than that. It's doing what Adam did that first year. Had Adam not done what he did, the world would not sustain itself. Adam brought the whole world under God's dominion. That is the theme of Rosh Hashanah. To make God want this world. Where He invests, what does it mean that when the shofar is blown, there's a new life force into the world? The life force is there the night as well also. We're living at that night. The night of Rosh Hashanah, when we're all dipping apples in honey, it's already, the new year, but it's before Rosh Hashanah, before the blowing. So we're all alive, but the world is in a faint state. We don't see it, perhaps. It lacks God's pleasure. He has no pleasure in what's happening yet. And when we, overnight, and the next morning blow the shofar, that is the proclamation. Not working? That's the proclamation that the Jews make to God, yes, we want this. And that's why the whole Rosh Hashanah Machzor talks about Hashem Melech, Hashem Molech, Hashem Yimlech. God is the king, God was the king, we want you to be the king. HaMelech HaKadosh, the king, the holy king. HaMelech HaMishpat, the holy judge. Everything's about king. Because that's the time that we're saying to Hashem, we want you to be the king. Now here's an interesting twist to this. So what are we basically saying? That the shofar blowing is the way we create, we draw once again into creation God's tainu, God's pleasure. But here's an interesting thing. If Rosh Hashanah doesn't fall out if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, yeah? We don't blow the shofar, right? On that day, we don't blow the shofar. So the rabbis ask, why don't we blow the shofar? And they answer. The reason is because Rabbi, in the time of the Talmud, made a decree. He said, we shouldn't blow the shofar, it's Shabbos. Why? Because we're worried that if someone is not an expert in blowing shofar, it takes a skill to blow shofar. So you have to learn the laws and the ways, so they're afraid that he's going to take the shofar Rosh Hashanah morning to the rabbi or to the expert to teach him how to blow the shofar. Right? And what's going to end up happening? He's going to carry the shofar in the public domain on Shabbos. So we're afraid of this, so they said don't blow the shofar on Shabbos. Did you know that? That's the reason we don't blow shofar on Shabbos. We're afraid of those few shlamazels that won't know how to blow the shofar, who was lazy enough to go find out the day before, to prepare. They woke up the last minute, Rosh Hashanah morning, I still have to learn how to blow the shofar. Then you go to the rabbi and forget that it's Shabbos and carry. Come on, is that a reason to deny the whole Jewish world this most important mitzvah, blowing the shofar? It's a biblical commandment. Now we just got through saying that the shofar is what the whole world hangs on the balance till the shofar is blown. So how could you deny the whole world the mitzvah of blowing shofar on Shabbos because of a few guys that may make a mistake? Maybe they'll make a mistake. We're not even sure. Why are we concerned about that? And how is the world going to sustain? We just got through saying that without the shofar, the world lacks the pleasure. God doesn't really invest himself in creation. So how is this happening? The answer is that on Shabbos, what is Shabbos known? There's a pasuk in the prophets that says, "V'karoso l'Shabbos oineg." You will call out the Shabbos a day of pleasure. You call the day of Shabbos pleasure. What is the theme of Shabbos, if you think about it? It's all about pleasure. What happened on Shabbos, that first Shabbos? Let's go back to the first Shabbos of creation. God created the whole world in 6 days, and the seventh day came, and Shabbos, God rested. So it says, again in Kabbalah, what happened? What was the beauty of Shabbos? Shabbos, God took a step back and looked at what he created, and he said, wow, this is beautiful. I really like this. This gives me a lot of pleasure. The rest, God, what happened Shabbos? The worlds elevate. The worlds rise on Shabbos. Why aren't we allowed to work on Shabbos? Why are you not allowed to do creative work on Shabbos? You're not allowed to cook, you're not allowed to write, you're not allowed to do this, that, the other. Why is that? Because it says the worlds rise to a higher level on Shabbos. And when you're so close to God, imagine when you go into the king's palace, you go into his inner chamber where he's sitting on his throne. Would you get busy cooking? Would you get busy doing your chores? Your simple activity? No, you're in a different environment, a different place. You're close to the king. A move can get you in trouble. There's decorum, there's rules, there's a way that you have behave in front of a king. One wrong move and he can be not just kicked out, but he can punish you severely. It says that in front of a king, you have to know exactly how to behave. So when the world is elevated, why is the world elevated? On Shabbos. So let's take an example of work. Let's take a person that's building. Next Sunday or in 2 weeks they're going to build a sukkah. I see it every year. The men get together and they build a sukkah. And an hour into the project, they're exhausted. They're exerting a lot of effort. It's heavy wood, it's heavy poles, have to climb, and it's a lot of work, it's a lot of exertion. When they finally come back inside and they're resting from the terrible work, what happens? So let's try to analyze this a second. When you work, your faculties, the hands are moving, your feet are moving, your mind is working, is focused on what you're doing. You're talking, you're engaged, right? You're engaged in what you're doing. So your life force, your faculties are invested in your hands, feet, whatever you're involved with. When you rest, what happens when you rest? So your soul, the soul powers are extended outward in an action, whether it's building a sukkah or doing this, whatever you're doing. When you finish doing the work, those soul faculties, those soul powers withdraw. They go back to their source in your soul. And you rest, and they refresh. That's exactly what happened in creation. For 6 days, God's spheres, his attributes, his power, his faculties, the life force extended downward, lowered itself to create, and on Shabbos it withdrew. It came back to its source. What does it mean it came back to its source? But it doesn't just, not only God's life force goes back to the source, the whole world is elevated into Hashem's source, into that source. And because of that, we are not allowed to work, because the world is on a level that is completely beyond. It's on a higher level, and it's much closer to Hashem. It's actually, it says it's within Hashem's reality. The world on the Sunday to Friday is extended outward. On Shabbos, the world is elevated inward, into Hashem's reality. Or in the words of the Kabbalah, on the 6 days of the week, Hashem created the world with speech. Right? So I'm asking you, on Shabbos he doesn't create, the world is not functioning on Shabbos. If he stopped speaking, right, on Shabbos he stopped, right? He rested from talking. So how does the world exist if he doesn't keep creating it? The Hashem has to keep investing and animating the world. So how does he create that? How does this happen on Shabbos? So it says God on Shabbos thinks the world into existence. What's the difference between speech and thought? If you're alone in a world, in a place, you have to talk. There's no one to talk to. Speech is a means that you're extending yourself to someone else. You want someone else to know what's in your mind, so you speak. So the only reason speech would ever be applied or employed was when there's someone else that you want to share information with. It's already you as you're extending yourself to something outside of you. Thought is the way you think about within your own self. So when you say the world is on Shabbat and the weekday is created by God's speech, it means that that's already God as he is extending himself to something outside of him. Whereas on Shabbos, the world is submerged within Hashem's reality, his thought. But the world is existing. Again, so let's go back to Shabbos. So that's Shabbos. So what happens on Shabbos? All of this was just a preface to explain that on Shabbos is a day that God takes tremendous pleasure in his creation, in his work, and what he did. Right? And that's why God called the Shabbos a day of joy. V'karata la Shabbat oneg. He called this Shabbos pleasure, because that's the day that God took great pleasure in what he did. So what did we say is the shofar? Why do we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? To bring once again into the world, not the godly creative force. That's there all the time. But there's a godly force that's with pleasure, and there's a godly force without pleasure. The shofar creates the drawing down of Hashem's inner forces, which is his will, his pleasure in creation. When we say we want you to be our king, God now wants to be our king. He has a joy. If we don't say we want him to be our king, then he has to force us to be our king. There's no great pleasure in that. So when we wake up in the morning on Rosh Hashanah, we go to shul, and we blow the shofar, and we say with kavanah, with great intention and heartful. We say, Hashem, we really want you to be our king. What you're doing is, and how do you say that? With the shofar blowing. We'll get in a minute, we'll explain to you how the shofar does that. But for now, the shofar is what does that. Is the proclamation of a Jew saying to Hashem, we want you to be our king. What does that do? It draws Hashem's joy and pleasure into his creative force. And that goes, that he says, you know what, I'm going for another year. I like this. This is great. If they're willing to accept me as their king and they'll promote me in the world and they'll create for me a dwelling place here on earth and they'll do my bidding, they'll do the Torah, they'll do the mitzvahs, they want the accepting this upon themselves willingly, I have an interest. My pleasure. So Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. So the Shabbos is pleasure and the shofar is pleasure. Right? You don't need both. The Shabbos itself is the day of God's pleasure in the world. So you don't need the shofar. On Shabbos, you don't need the shofar. So Rabbi just says, that we don't blow the shofar. Why? He found a technical reason. What's the technical reason? Because he's afraid that someone will carry on Shabbos. But for that alone, it's unlikely that the rabbis would abolish a mitzvah, such an important mitzvah, blowing the shofar, because someone may carry on Shabbos. That may be a technical answer, but the real reason we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos is because Shabbos, you don't need the shofar. The whole idea of shofar is what? Bring about to draw God's pleasure into his creation. The Shabbos on its own does it. What do we do on Shabbos? We try to enjoy Shabbos, right? Oneg Shabbos, right? There's something called in Judaism Oneg Shabbat, the pleasure of Shabbos. We sleep a little more on Shabbos, right? Shabbat shina b'Shabbat ta'anug. Sleeping on Shabbos is a great pleasure. That's one level of pleasure. There's people that enjoy sleeping, so they should sleep. People enjoy good food, so the rabbis tell us, bring good food onto your table. This is all part of this. People that enjoy learning a little more, that's their pleasure. So that's what they do on Shabbos. But it's all about bringing new pleasure into the world, because that's what Hashem is enjoying. So on Rosh Hashanah, that falls on Shabbos, you don't need the shofar, because Shabbos does the job. Shabbos alone brings God's pleasure into the world. So, yeah?
A question. We said that Rosh Hashanah is for everybody, all the creatures. Hashem judges...
All of creation. Yeah.
Yes, judges animals, judges non-Jews and everything. So Hashem's expectation is only from the Jews to come and proclaim him as a king?
Yeah.
That's it? Not from...
The Goyim don't have a mitzvah to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah.
Not from the...
Why? So you ask him, why doesn't he want everyone to come to shul and blow the shofar? So the first word in the Torah answers that question. What's the first word in the Torah? Bereshis.
Right.
It should have said Batchila. It's not a really, it's a funny word to use in saying in the beginning. The beginning is more Batchila, Barishona. What is Bereshis? So the rabbis tell us Bereshis is an acronym. Beis Reishis. Bereshis. Beis Reishis. What does Reishis mean? The first. Reishis means the first, like Rishon. The first. What is Beis? 2. Aleph is 1, Beis is 2. So the rabbis tell us, let's look at that verse for a minute. Bereshis bara Elikim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, which we translate as in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The rabbis say an interesting twist on this verse. Beis Reishis, it's on account of 2 things that are called Reishis that God created the heaven and the earth. Why did he create the heaven and the earth? Because of those 2 things that are called first. What are the 2 things that are called first? The Torah and the Jewish people. The Jewish people are called first, and the Torah is called first. And Beis Reishis, it's on account of those 2 things that are called Reishis, that Bara Elokim is Hashemayim Ve'asaras, that God created the heaven and the earth. That the whole creation happened because of these 2. which tells you that the purpose of creation was for the Jewish people to learn Torah and to do the mitzvahs. That's what it's about. And the whole world benefits and comes and is elevated on account of what we do in Torah and mitzvahs. So yes, of course the whole world is judged, and all mankind is given another year of creation, takes pleasure in all of man. But who's really the one that makes this all happen? The Jewish people. He chose us for that purpose. He chose us to be the ambassadors of him, his ambassadors here on earth, to do his bidding, to do his work. So we put on tefillin, we daven, we learn Torah, we do mitzvahs, we do everything that he wants. That's what makes it happen. But the truth is that we should encourage other peoples to do what they have to do and be good people and decent people and proclaim God as their king. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu was given the mitzvah at Mount Sinai to teach to all the nations of the world the 7 Noachide mitzvahs, the 7 mitzvahs that apply to all mankind. And the first one is to believe in God. So yes, every single person has to believe in God. But it's the Jewish people that make this happen. It's like when you have a whole household, a king has a whole palace with a whole empire, with a whole thing. But then he has his children. His children are the one that make everything happen. So Rosh Hashanah, and its theme is that idea. To bring, in the words of Kabbalah, to bring into creation the pleasure of creation. That God should really enjoy it, because if he doesn't enjoy it, he's stopping it. And how do we create that pleasure? By blowing shofar. Why does shofar do that? How does a shofar do that? It would make more sense if we all together daven and said to God, we want you to be our king, and have an interesting discussion about it, and so people understand. The rabbi should get up at the pulpit and tell everyone, let's all together, like Adam did. He brought all creation into kneel before God, and so it would make more sense if we read the book and we would talk about Hashem and understand what we're doing. What is the shofar blowing? A man gets up at the bima and makes sounds out of a horn. What's going on here? So if it is, I will tell you 2 parables, and with that we'll conclude. One parable is from the Baal Shem Tov, and one parable is from Rabbi Yitzroel of Barditchev for the concept of blowing the shofar. I'll start with the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov says, what's the shofar? And why does that do it? So he says tells the story of a king who had a son, who the son was his only son, a prince. And he loved him. He loved his son. He gave him the best teachers, the best nutrition, the best everything. And naturally, when he was an adult, 18, 19, 20, he was a perfect kid. It was like there was nothing better. I mean, he gave him everything the best. One day an advisor comes to him, an advisor of the king, someone he really appreciates, and tells him, Your Majesty, I know you love your son. I know you take great pleasure in his success. But you don't really know this child's integrity till you test it. What I suggest you do, he tells him, is you have to send him away from the palace. Let him go to a faraway country where the people in that country don't even know about your existence. And send them on a mission there for 10, 15 years to turn that whole that locale, that country around so that they become your subjects, that they recognize that you're the king. Because they don't even know that you're the king. If your son can go there, and instead of being influenced by that place and by that the people are simpleton, they're farmers, and they're not really on a high level at all. So if he's able to go there and turn them around and bring them to you, now you know your son has integrity. So it's very easy to be a prince in the palace. No, he doesn't know anything else. There's no challenge. Challenge him. See if he's capable. So the king says, I like your ideas. You're right. Calls him the son, tells him the plan, sending you to the other side of the kingdom, where people have no idea who I am or what I represent, and I want you to teach them. I'm giving you a 10, 15-year project. He fills him up a suitcase, gives him some money. Adios. He sends him off. And the son is going with tremendous force. He's excited about his mission. He's really devoted. He goes in, he starts working with the people, and it's hard, and it's very, very... And the people don't understand what he's talking about. When king, and he's busy with their farming, and they're busy with their daily... And what happens over time is it gets too hard for him, and he's influenced by his surroundings, and little by little he becomes more like them, then they become like him. So it's the other way. It has the opposite effect. To the point where so many years pass that he totally forgets his father's language, his father's ways, his customs. He just became one of the farmers. Many, many years pass, and his father says, let me check up on my son. How's he doing? And he sends him, one day the son receives a letter that is now 50 years of his father's kingdom, and they're going to make a major celebration in the palace. They celebrate 50 years of the king. And he's inviting him to come home for that. He's not going to let his son miss. So he sends him an invitation, and the son now he remembers father is a king. He remembers why he was sent there. It all comes back to him and says, I must go. To this I must attend. And he goes, he makes the trip back to the palace to the other side of the world. Slowly finally he gets to the palace. But he doesn't know anyone there. They don't recognize him. They don't know him. The palace guards don't know who he is. So he knocks on the door and they come out. The problem is he doesn't speak their language. He forgot the simple language of that side of the king's palace. So he's trying to communicate with them, but they don't know. They thought he was a drunk, who he was. So they left him alone. Get out of here. Leave us alone. It's the son. It's the prince. They don't realize it. So he decided he's crying now. Now he's crying. He doesn't know what to do. He's outside his father's door. He doesn't know. He can't get in. Remembers that the father's bedroom, the king's bedroom, is at the edge of the compound of the palace, and if he goes out to the outside of that the wall around, the wall of the palace, in the middle of the night, he'll scream to his father. Maybe he'll recognize his voice, and he hopes that this will happen. He goes there, and he starts screaming at the top of his lungs. The king wakes up, tells the queen, "What's going on? What's that?" They wake up. And it's a recognizable voice. They don't understand what he's saying because he's speaking a different language, but the voice they recognize. He said, "This is our son, my God, go down and get him." And they bring him in, and there's a reunion, and it's just a tremendous, exciting moment. Rosh Hashanah says that's what's happening that's what Rosh Hashanah is about. On Rosh Hashanah, the story of the Jewish people is as follows. Our neshamas grew up in the palace. We came down to earth because God told us a soul in heaven is not an accomplishment. To be a soul in heaven, anyone can be a soul in heaven. I want to see what you, my son, my prince, the Jewish people can do on the other side of the kingdom here on earth. So he sends us down into our body. And we're born and we come into the world with tremendous enthusiasm. The Shama is ready to take on the mission to turn the whole world around and make it God's domain. But he grows up, and life takes its starts demanding of him, certain things, and he starts forgetting the language of heaven. And he starts adapting to the ways of the earth and to the language of the earth and to the desires and pleasures and life on the earth. And he forgets about his father. He totally forgets. And we forget the language of heaven. We forget the language of the king. But then we get a notice, Rosh Hashanah is coming. God is going to celebrate his anniversary. The day he became king. Other made him king many, many thousands of years ago. So the Eibishter says, I want to invite my kids to this anniversary. So we get notice that the anniversary is starting. It's going to be on Rosh Hashanah. The problem is we don't know how to even talk the language of the king anymore. We forgot. there's one thing we still have that's not being tainted, is the essence of our neshama. The fact that we are His son, that is never tainted. That remains intact all the time. No matter what we do or don't do, the Son of God, we are the children of Hashem, we are the Jewish people. So what do? We take out a shofar, we don't sit there and give a lecture and talk, because we don't know what to say. We forgot the language. We don't even know the right language to talk about. So what we do is we take out a shofar. What is the shofar? The shofar is the shout, the scream that comes from the depth of our heart, that tells God, no matter what we did and what we are your son, and we want to be one with you. It's the cry from the depth of the heart, like that prince that doesn't even know what to say anymore. But he hopes his father will recognize his voice. The shofar is the deep voice of the soul that no longer has the means to communicate with God other than a deep cry from the depth of his heart. So that's why the shofar does it. The shofar tells Hashem, we're still here. We have an interest in you. Even though we're not really sure we remember everything about you, but one thing we know is we are son, and we want you to be our king again. The second parable, and with this I'll conclude, is from Rabbi Yisroel of Barditchev. And he says that the shofar blowing is for the following reason. When God gave the Torah at Sinai, we're told that he went to other nations first. He gives a parable, tells the story of a king. King went out of his palace on a trip, on a hunting trip, on a fishing trip, whatever the king likes to do. And he went out, and sometimes the king, in these trips, he likes to go out on his own. Went out on his own, and I guess the horses went in a way that they lost track. The king is now lost. He Pasha doesn't know where to go. He doesn't know how to get back to where his group is. He's getting deeper and deeper into the forest. The more he tries to go back, the more he's entangling himself in. And a day to the night falls, and he doesn't know where he is. The next day and 2 days, he's worried that he's in big trouble. Finally, he sees from a distance a light shining. There's a house. There's some hope. He goes to that house, makes with his last strength, knocks on the door, and falls on the floor from exhaustion. The person comes out and doesn't know who he is. So he tells him, he says, and I'm the king, but I lost my way and I haven't eaten in 3 days. I'm desperate. Help me out. He takes him in, he bathes him, he washes him, he gives him a place, he gives him a hot soup, he revives him, brings him back to life. And he gives the king a new set of clothing, because the clothing that the king is wearing now were all filthy and torn already there. And he gives him some food, he tells him how to get back to his place, and he goes back, and the king is back in his palace, he's living happily ever after. A number of years later, 10, 15 years later, this person that saved the king violated some rule of the king, and he did a terrible offense, and the rule in the kingdom was death for such a thing. So the king comes before the king, and the ministers, the judges say, you have to kill him. Okay, that's the rule. But they give one last wish. They tell the person, you can have one wish before you die. He says, fine, this is what I want. If you can bring me before the king, and tell the king I'd like him to wear the clothing that he was wearing when he was at my front door, when he then was lost. And I want to wear the clothing that I wore when he met me first. The king says, no problem. The king gets into those clothing, he gets into those clothing, and they're face to face. What happens, obviously? The king remembers exactly what happened, that this person saved him, I'm going to go kill him now. That whole memory came back to him. That's what the man was trying to create. And he succeeded. And the king said, I can't kill this guy. He saved him. He's giving him a second chance. He tells him, you're my man, but do me a favor, don't do this again. And that's good. So the Rabbi Yisroel says that's what the shofar is. What happened at Mount Sinai? God went around to other nations, and he asked them, would you like the Torah? They all turned him down. Came to the Jewish people, and we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, yes, we'll do it. What happened after we said we'll do it? We didn't really do it. We slacked off, right? We didn't really get, So we get now into trouble with God, right? We're in trouble. It's a day of judgment. So what do we tell God? We come before God and we say to Him, Ata Niglesa, you revealed yourself to us at Mount Sinai. If you take a look in this book, it's right over here, page 213. You revealed yourself in your cloud of glory to your holy people to speak to them at Mount Sinai. And we tell God, let's recreate Mount Sinai. They say to Him, you remember that day when you came to us and asked us if we want your Torah? You came over there, no one wanted you. The whole world turned you down.
Yeah.
We were the only one that said yes to you. And what did you do at Mount Sinai? The shofar was blown at Mount Sinai. So it's the same exact thing. What we're creating before God on Rosh Hashanah is a repeat of Mount Sinai, when He was desperate. And we saved Him from from bankruptcy. His whole project of the world and the Torah was going down the tubes. No one wanted it. And we saved Him. We said, yeah, we'll do it for you. So you can now judge us negatively. So the shofar blowing, Rabbi Yisroel says, is like the torn clothing. We recreate the scene when we were there for God, when He needed us so desperately. So under such circumstances, God, of course, could not judge us to death, to the book of death. Of course, He judges us to the book of life. He says, but do me a favor, do a little better this year. Do tshuva, I'm with you, don't worry, I'm not going to harm you, I'm not going to judge you negatively, but let's make up again. And that's what the shofar blowing is. So on account of those two parables, which are so powerful, if you think about them, that's what creates the pleasure, and that's what gives the life, the world, a new life, a lease on life for another whole year. And we are judged favorably by Hashem because He loves us, and He knows that He has no one else that's going to do this job for Him better than us. That's a guarantee. And therefore, we go to Rosh Hashanah with total confidence that it's all going to be fine, and we're going to do well, and we're going to proclaim Him King like Adam HaRishon did, and we're going to earn His pleasure in us. It's not going to be free lunch, because we earned it, we worked for Him, even through thick and thin. Have a wonderful week,
Thank you.
and a happy and healthy New Year.